Welcome to Bridging Chicago, a podcast that aims to connect our listeners to Chicago's business, community, cultural, and charity leaders.
Hello and welcome to Season 7 of the Bridging Chicago podcast. We're really excited to be able to start this new season with you. Our past 6 seasons have brought many business leaders, community leaders, nonprofit leaders here in the Chicagoland area to you, our listeners, and we're grateful to you for continuing on with us here in our next season, in our new Season 7. And we decided to bring someone really exciting and really, I'm sure most of you have probably heard the name, one reason or another. Our first guest for Season 7, Walter Mendenhall. Walter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
I mean, a Chicago name is always fun to talk to because a lot of the people that we talk to actually are transplants to the city.
Oh, really? Oh, man.
It's surprising to me. Like, wow. I would say a good majority of people, I mean, I'm technically a transplant. I'm an Illinois guy, but
Gotcha.
A transplant to the city. And so their perception of Chicago when they get here is always a little different. It's often a little skewed, but you're going to obviously have a unique perception and a unique
definitely.
Experience with the city. And so we're excited to hear about that. But thank you for joining us. Thanks for
thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Let's talk about your Chicago experience because we always ask people first, we're bridging Chicago, what brought you here?
Yes.
Growing up here, what was that like being a youth here in the city?
Man, I would say that I had a perspective that not a lot of people in this city had. The first is that because Chicago is such a segregated city, really the most segregated city in America, that I had an opportunity to live on the south side, to live on the north side, to live in the north suburbs, to live in the south suburbs. Wow. So I got a chance to have this whole kind of dichotomy of the city.
Yeah.
And what I've learned just growing up, originally spending my early childhood on the south side of Chicago, then eventually moving to the north suburbs and spending a lot of time Skokie, Evanston, Rogers Park, which is all kind of neighboring communities. And then my high school years moving down to the south suburbs, which particularly Riverdale. I had this experience in which I saw the best of what Chicago has to offer, but also saw the worst of what Chicago has to offer. Yeah. And I also realized too that there's good and bad in everywhere that you go in Chicago. I think there's a lot of stereotypes. I think there's a lot of perceptions about certain types of town, certain neighborhoods. But what I really learned is that everybody really wants the same things. And really, I also learned too, and one of the biggest takeaways was that poverty wasn't necessarily how much money you had in your pocket, but it was really a mentality. And I learned that, being on the south side of Chicago and then going to the north suburbs and the immigrant community, that yes, both didn't have money, but it was a different mindset. Yeah. And I think that was really the biggest takeaway that I had growing up here.
Yeah, it's always interesting when people mention the polarizing sort of nature of Chicago, the segregation, because it's kind of one of those things that Chicago actually prides itself in is its neighborhoods. The neighborhoods can be very different from each other. So people know about the Chicago neighborhoods. They know about the north side versus the south side versus the west side. They know about the Loop. So in a city where we sort of embrace the neighborhood concept that also kind of creates some natural segregation.
Yes.
How do you think that plays out to the way that the people live their lives or experience the city or just like even just educate their kids? And
100%.
I mean, I think about like when you move, you have to think about different grocery stores you're going to go to and all these things that, Chicagoans think about every day when they're interacting with their neighborhoods or other neighborhoods around them.
100%. I think, and this is a honest critique, I feel, of Chicago. I think a lot of people live in bubbles. I have friends that live on the north side that never been to the south side. I have friends on the south side that had never been to the north side. And their reality or perception about Chicago is particularly based on their bubble
Yeah.
and what they see on TV.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's where these negative stereotypes where, oh, don't go to the South Side of Chicago. South Side of Chicago is the biggest landmass of the city.
Yeah.
You know, Mount Greenwood is different than Inglewood.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
on the South Side. And it's just like you get these stereotypes that, you know, have some truth, but really no truth in it.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually played in a volleyball league in Mount Greenwood
Mhm.
and with my friends from Beverly.
Mhm.
And she took me to this restaurant, like this local restaurant down in Beverly that they all go to. And then like 3 more times I had to go to that restaurant.
Yeah.
It's so good. I was like, all right, that's my spot now down here. And, you know, I've been to a couple places on the West Side that are really, I guess I like to eat. So that's what brings me to a lot of these places. But one of the things that I've noticed, and even in talking to some of our guests, is that there's an economic boom happening in these places.
Yeah.
But it's really, while there may be a boom happening, there's always been economy in these areas. And there's always been these mom and pop shops that just kind of stay local because only locals are shopping there.
Yeah.
Only locals are experiencing, you know, the vibe, the culture, the economy down there. And I think more people are getting to experience that, or at least getting to know that. I think one of the reasons, and I don't know, for me, like social media has really, you know, helped
100%.
a lot of these communities just get the word out there about what's already there.
Yeah.
Do you see that same sort of thing happening, and do you see more people experiencing these because of different reasons? Or
I think it's multifaceted. I think social media has something to do with it, especially for exposure to different opportunities, different restaurants, different social media influencers, particularly in the food kind of influencers that go to. So I really appreciate those. I also think too the city is changing demographically, you know, neighborhood wise. You know, there's just gentrification. There's repurposing, and it's just the city as a whole is changing.
Yeah.
Some people like it, some people don't. I think the only thing that's inevitable is change. So change is going to happen. Is whether, you know, are you going to be a part of that change, or are you going to be a casualty of the change?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. It's going to happen, and change is not always bad.
Yeah. It's constant.
It's constant. It's the only constant, really. So when you were growing up, at what point did you realize, okay, I'm playing football in high school. I might have an opportunity to do this post high school and find a college that will, you know, help me finance my education so that I can continue on with that. At what point were you like, this is something I can take and a resource that I have that can help me down the road?
You know, it actually came late. You know, my sophomore year playing football, nobody knew who I was. Played my junior year and had a great year. And by the time I was a senior, I was actually the #1 running back in the state of Illinois and had some opportunities to go different places. But loving Chicago, I wanted to stay local. So it was really only 2 choices. It was Northwestern, located in Evanston, right outside of Chicago, and the University of Illinois. And it really came down to Evanston was just too close. It was the next town over. I probably wouldn't have a chance to, you know, it's not really a Big Ten campus. That's what I would say. Northwestern is small, more private school. You know, I went down to Illinois and fell in love with it. And it was really the best decision, one of the best decisions I made.
Yeah, it's really hard to separate Illinois, the University of Illinois, from the community of Champaign-Urbana. It is like all of that. And so even though it's like easy to go to U of I and really not go off campus, once you do, you realize like the whole community is kind of just one thing. It's one, which makes it like a really good family friendly environment.
College town, man. I think it was like the #1 party school. Like something.
Were a lot of your friends, a lot of the people that you hung around with, were they like also finding colleges to go to? Were they kind of going through that process of figuring out like, okay, the next step is going to be this, and were most of them able to like find places where they could go and continue school, or were they looking for work? Or
so I went to Niles West High School, located in Skokie, Illinois, one of the most diverse high schools in the state. My school, it was 44 languages spoken.
Wow.
And a lot of them were immigrants or first generation. And what I realized about first generation, they really emphasize school. And school is like, it's not if you go to college, it's what college you're going to. And so it was very competitive. So college was always something that everybody was doing. So I was fortunate enough that I was able to, have the choices that I had. And, even though I did well academically, I was a 3.0 student. I was actually, kind of in the, 60th percentile. So it was competitive academically. So, but I was just, a lot of people went to U of I from my school, and, college was an expectation. It wasn't a option.
Being a student athlete, I don't think many of us really understand even close to what that means, because it's like, you mentioned having a 3.0, but a 3.0 as a student athlete has to be really difficult to like, because I mean, it's a job, it's a full-on job to do a sport, and especially a sport where it's going to be a part of what gets you to the next stage in life. It's going to be a part of what, helps you get to where you want to go. And so being a student athlete, both in high school and in college, what were the sort of, what was the extra work that came with that? What was that like? What was that, what are the challenges really that added on for you to figure out? Because there's a lot of things we're learning at that time.
Most definitely. So I think for me, it was probably the best thing that ever happened, because it gave me discipline and it taught me time management. You only have so many hours in a day. When you play a sport, that sport takes, a nice chunk of that. So you really have to be organized. You really have to be structured. And a lot of those lessons that I learned in high school, in college, particularly with time management and being disciplined, I've carried to this day, which has helped me to be successful, because people are like, how can you do all this? It's just really, I structure my time in a way that, I can get stuff done.
I've heard before, like, time is the most valuable resource. And so I like to have a really structured day to make sure that I get the important things done.
But I'm surprised how many people just wake up and just go through life and just do stuff.
And the thing is,
it's crazy to me.
They can be very happy doing that. I can't do that. I can't do that.
Not at all.
I try not to be the guy that, like, if something changes, I'm like freaked out. But like, I don't know how people operate just saying like, we'll see what the day brings. It's like, only because I think that to do what you really are passionate about doing, and to make the kind of change in the world that you want to make, to just wake up and say, I'll see what happens, I think is really difficult to be able to do the work and to make the change without some sort of plan for the day.
100%.
Or for that season, at least, of your life.
And I tell my young people all the time, you're either living with intention or you're living in distraction. And what I feel is that when you just wake up and it's just like whatever happens, that's a distraction, because you will fill your time with distractions. And a lot of times distractions get you in trouble, especially when you're a younger person. So I challenge my young people and the people who are around me to be intentional about your day, plan your day. What is it that you want to accomplish? Have some goals so you can start accomplishing things and being more productive.
Do you find that people, when you talk to them, a lot of people are familiar with goal setting and sort of planning to reach for those goals?
You'd be surprised. No, not at all. Not at all. I think, especially in this generation, writing something down, having goals, having that action plan is just, it's not as common as you would think.
I know I've heard of like the vision board concept, where you like put things on a board that you want to accomplish, and I think that it's a nice concept, but it's the same as everything else. If it's up there and you're not making plans towards it, are you really using it as a resource to actually move towards those? And I've seen in my life before where I'll even write goals or I'll like vision things, and it's like they never happen because I realized I actually wasn't planning for those things. I wasn't actually making steps towards those. Even if I'm visioning like, oh, this is where I want to be at this next point in my life, it's like, well, you still have to plan and make steps towards those things.
100%. And I know for myself, I write things down and I constantly look at them. Even if it's once a week, I have a planner. I have a, what I call a vision traction organizer. So I'm very intentional about goals, how I'm progressing, my action step towards those goals, and if I'm accomplishing them in the time frame that I want them.
What role does discipline play in your life, and what have you learned from being a student athlete, both about discipline and leadership? Because I think those are two skills that are very important, that actually playing sports at any level teaches you a lot about those two things particularly.
Yeah, most definitely. I think what sports has given me in particularly is what I call transferable skills. So yes, I can no longer run a football. I can't run fast. I can't jump high anymore. My back hurts. My knees are messed up. But what I have learned is those leadership skills, how to effectively communicate, how to inspire, how to motivate, and then also discipline in accomplishing a goal. And what I believe is that a lot of times people feel like discipline is a bad word. It's like, oh, I don't want to do what it takes in order to get what I want. And discipline, I feel, is for me actually is freedom. Because if I have the discipline not to eat all this junk food, or if I have the discipline to work out every morning, I'm in turn feel better about myself, and I feel that I have a certain amount of freedom because I don't necessarily have to give in to the things that I want. To have the discipline to resist and make myself better.
I think that's all a part, just hearing what you said, I think that's all a part of setting yourself up to succeed, really. It's like if I have a plan, it's actually freedom, because then if something goes awry from that plan, like you can move a lot. I think there's a lot of flexibility to make moves and to, like, you can never plan for, the wrenches that get thrown in there. But I think it's experience. It's the practice of having that experience of knowing, okay, I've seen this before, or something else has happened before, so I can make moves.
100%. And I think the great thing about football is that you get hit and you got to get back up. And I think that's a direct correlation in life. You get hit multiple.
Good for you.
You get hit. And it's like, oh my God, I don't want to get hit again, but I have to get back up and do it again. So I think it's when life throws you curveballs, when things don't happen, when things don't go according as planned, you have to make those adjustments. And I think football for me has given me a type of perseverance, endurance, and resistance, where it's like, okay, yes, it didn't work out I wanted to, so how do I adjust?
You mentioned an interesting point there. It's like, you're getting hit by big dudes. Like these are huge, big dudes that are purposefully, like, there's 11 guys who are like, I would love to take that guy down. How do you, I mean, you mentioned it, like, you just have to get back up, but are there those hits that you're like, I just don't want to, like,
all the time. No one who wants to get hit.
That's why,
like, if I put you in the face right now, like, would you like, oh, give me another one? No, but yes, it's you develop what I call a callus. So it's just like, you get hit, it hurts. And then, you keep getting hit and it just doesn't hurt, and you just kind of just build up this kind of callus where, it doesn't affect you as much. And I think with adversity, the more that you go through and that you overcome, the more I feel successful you can be, because, you are overcoming some things that a lot of times people stay down on. And the more that you can overcome, the more experience that you have, the more situations, that's how you become a leader. That's how you become a thought expert. That's how you become credible.
That makes me think of, like, I had kind of a crazy, I was born in Mexico, came to the U.S., kind of a crazy time and that happening. And it took a long time for me to process that, and for me to, like, understand what that sort of adversity could do for me and could, like, strengthen me. And for me, a lot of it was getting professional help, going to therapy, like really working
100%.
through like, and even the concept of like being able to forgive people who like, I don't know my biological parents, I never will. It's pretty impossible for me to do that. But like, how do you forgive someone who like, they will never be able to ask for it. You'll never meet them. They're not a part of your life. And so how do you, process through these things? What are some ways that you have been able to process through some of the things that you've experienced in your life, or that other people who you're close to have experienced, in a way that helps you do something good with it? Because 100%. I think that's really one of the things that keeps people from being able to move forward a lot of times, is not being able to process the hard times, the challenges, in a way that allows us to use that 100%. In the future.
I think that's a great question. I think for me, and I've had a lot of traumas in my life, in stemming back from college. I contemplated suicide at one point. Grew up in a single parent household. Not a lot of money, and just a lot of traumas. Yeah. And I think for me, what I tell my young men a lot of times is life is 10% what happens to you, 90% how you respond to it. So the first thing is understanding that I have the power to respond. Yeah. I am not a victim. I can choose my response. Yeah. And from there, for me, is realizing that now it's, how do I get past these things that's keeping me from being the best version of myself? So like you, that was therapy. That was continuing to exercise. That was forgiving people who have wronged me, and not holding that in. Yeah. And releasing those things. And I think too, forgiveness is also a process. I feel like you can do the initial, but it's like, for me, I can't speak for everybody else. It's like I have to constantly kind of forgive, because it keeps coming up different ways, and just a process of forgiveness. And from there is sharing. Sharing what I've been through with others, because you just don't know what other people are going through. And the more you can talk about, the more you can be vulnerable, I think the more it reaches people. Yeah,
that's so good. Make sure you replay that and listen to that again, because I think there's a lot of good nuggets in there. And I think that, we all want to get to that other side, but it's hard work. Oh, yeah. And I think, just understanding that alone, like, it's hard work. We understand that it's not going to be easy, but like,
it's a process.
And there's successes and failures.
Peaks and valleys.
Yeah. Well, we have so much more to talk about, and we haven't even gotten to that.
Oh yeah,
we worked on now. So we're going to put this into 2 parts so that you can come back and listen, because we want to make sure we get all this good information in there. So be sure to join us next week, where we will release part 2 of today's episode with Walter Mendenhall, and we'll talk about what you have going on now, and how you are shaping the young leaders of tomorrow for our city. So be sure to join us next week for part 2 of our episode with Walter Mendenhall. Awesome.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Bridging Chicago, as produced by the SATC Solutions Center. Nothing contained in this podcast shall constitute financial, investment, legal, and/or professional advice. No professional relationship of any kind is created between you and the podcast host or guest. You are urged to speak with your financial, investment, or legal advisors before making any investment or legal decisions. Furthermore, the opinions expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the opinions of SATC Solutions Center, SATC Law, or any of its employees. This podcast is created by the hosts and guests' individual capacities. All opinions on this podcast are or have been rendered based on specific facts, under certain conditions, and are subject to certain assumptions, and may not and should not be used or relied upon for any other purpose, including but not limited to, or use in or in connection with any investment purposes or legal proceeding.